And that being 15 seconds past 7 o'clock, greetings everyone, and welcome to the session, To the Future, What's Next in Scholarly Publishing, The View from Canada. This panel coming to you from a number of locations across both English and French-speaking Canada, in BC, in Ontario, and Quebec, and in the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Neutral, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Seneca, Mississauga, Haudenosaunee, and other Indigenous peoples on whose traditional territories we work and gather. My name's John Maxwell, and I am your moderator today. I am a faculty member from the Simon Fraser University in the Publishing Studies program there. And I would like to welcome and introduce our panel of Canadian scholarly publishers. We have Lisa Quinn, who is director at Wilfrid Laurier University Press, who is also a past president of the Association of Canadian University Presses, ACUP. Patrick Poirier is director general of Les Presses de l'Université de Montréal. He also serves as a director of Livre Canada Books. And Hamish Cameron, Vice President of Distribution for the University of Toronto Press, who was formerly also Executive Director of the Association of Canadian Publishers, as well as several other roles in Canadian publishing. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Our broad agenda today is to explore the future dissemination of both Canadian published scholarship into the world and internationally published scholarship into Canada. A suitable scope for Frankfurt, I think. But also this will allow us to drill down into the operational realities for publishers like these, members of ACUP, the Association of Canadian University Presses, at this point in time and looking forward to the future. So I'll have a number of sort of leading questions that I'd like to pose to the panel as prompts for discussion. And we'll take about 40 minutes to work through those questions. And then we'll stop and we can take questions from the audience. We can do that as we go along. You can use the Q&A button in Zoom to add questions, and then we can take that as we go once we're done. So with that as a general skeleton, the first thing I'd like to put to the panel is, given that we're at Frankfurt in some respect, where conversations often revolve around rights trading, can you talk about how your press approaches foreign markets, how this fits into your overall business model, and the opportunities and challenges that face a press like yours at this moment in time in 2020? And I'd like to direct that to Hamish to begin. Thanks.
Hi, good morning, afternoon. As the panel knows, I'm no expert on the rights side. I'm on the distribution side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of set the table here for what the situation is that our people who would normally go to Frankfurt and who are participating in the fair this year would have as their background, and a little bit of insight into where that fits into the overall picture. I'm going to try to share my screen. Here we go. Can you see that? Yes, I hope so. So first of all, just a few slides here I'll go over very quickly, set the scene. This is the rate of change for our stores, our sales into college stores. And as you can see,
I'm not sure we can see that actually.
No?
No.
What?
Let's try that screen share again.
Wait a second.
There we go.
There you go.
There it is.
There you go. So the overall situation, of course, is that college store sales, which is our bread and butter, I guess you could say. I mean, outside of research libraries and wholesale type sales, we depend a lot on college store sales, and they have been flat, as you can see, on a bit of a decline. And of course, in the pandemic year, they've completely fallen off the table. But the interesting thing is in the next table here, you can see what this is showing you is the size of the orders. So at the top here, these are the large orders. These would be like full class size orders for textbooks generally, and they have been generally going down. And this year with no classes, in-person classes, it was completely disappeared. But the interesting thing is, what you can see is that yes, the decline goes through all the sort of ranges of order sizes. But when you get down to the onesies and twosies at the bottom, you can see it's really falling off. So people are not, stores are not special ordering one book or two books for students or faculty or whatever. That market has been disappearing to other sources. A huge, other source, of course, is Amazon for those single orders. I'm not showing that, but get this thing to change. There you go. A lot of that slack has been taken up through e-commerce sales through our own website. So the top table here shows you the rate of change for ebook sales off our website, which has been steadily going up. There's a big bump in 2018 because we had a new website, but and this year you can see it's just phenomenal, off the charts. People buying ebooks instead of print through our website. So some of the slack has definitely been taken up there, but print sales off the website, which are all onesies basically, have been steadily going up as well. So there has been a very significant shift in single copy sales into stores, and now being purchased online. The other thing I wanted to show here was this gets closer to Frankfurt activity. Our print sales in Europe have been going up. We had a bit of a dip in 2018, but generally it's been going up year over year. And the interesting thing about these print sales is that as we have progressed in the last couple of years, most of those print sales have shifted from print exports, overseas shipments to print on demand sales from the UK. So where we very rarely ship new books or backlist in any kind of quantity to the UK, or at least that is shifting quite a bit into print on demand into the UK. And if there's time, I can go into that at great length. Also, ebook sales outside of Canada. I chose outside of Canada because there's a lot of funding in Canada for ebook collections in libraries, so it skews the data in a very positive way. But you can see that even outside of Canada, our ebook sales have been growing steadily, and that's, we're continuously adding new aggregators, and there is demand for it. So that's my story. And so basically we're seeing a shift away from smaller sales, and and those smaller sales are being taken up in-house on our website or through Amazon. On the general topic of export sales are not a significant source of revenue for us, but they are nevertheless very important, and it's particularly for a scholarly press. I mean, even though they're not as a percentage of the overall revenue very high, they have a very material effect on reputation, which for a scholarly press is very important, especially with authors. So, we don't have a lot of resources that we devote to rights sales, but we're nevertheless committed to them. And the feedback that I get from the rights people is that so much of the sales that they make in rights is based on personal relationships that they develop with in-person meetings at Frankfurt. Nevertheless, they're actually looking forward very much to this year, and they'll be interested to see what the outcomes are. And some of them said that in some ways they expect it to be easier because there'll be more time to do all the administration around closing rights deals. And that will normally be taken up walking around, going out, and having meetings run over, etc. So I guess that's where I will pass to the next person.
Thanks, Hamish. So that's perspective from the University of Toronto Press. Can we hear from Patrick Poirier from Le Presse de l'Université de Montréal, which is a francophone press, probably a completely different perspective on this?
Actually,
Patrick?
it is. Yeah, it is a different perspective. Well, I mean, I could probably say the same thing that Hamish has said concerning the importance of exports as far as our sales revenues are concerned. They're not that important, but they are very important to us. They're marginal in some way, but we couldn't do without them. And of course, being a francophone press, our markets are quite different. We tend to export towards Belgium, France, Switzerland, and for the past couple of years, I've been trying to make do with developing our market in North Africa, in Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. And so that's an interesting market for us to explore. Of course, that is a complicated venue, considering all the transportation, the fees that are attached to it. I've also noticed that as far as trying to get into these markets, the pricing of books in certain countries is very, very important. We've been to Casablanca's book fair for the last 2 years, and we have a very close relationship with the library, the bookstore Préface, with whom we've developed a really great partnership. And my observations were that our books that were in sale there, the price was just not affordable for Moroccan public. And so lately I've been in conversation with another colleague from Tunisia, and we're trying to sell rights, and we have partnerships. And what's more and more important to me as far as dissemination is concerned, and that market, is to make sure that the pricing of the books reflect more the realities of those countries. And so that, of course, has an impact on our sales revenues, because the books will never make what we're making here in Canada or in France or in Belgium. But it seems to me that as far as our mission is concerned, which is to disseminate our research, Canadian research, and knowledge, I think those questions need to be balanced. So to a certain extent, I'd rather know that we're selling books in Tunisia, even if it's a low price. But to us, the important thing is to reach a greater number of readers. And so on that part, yeah, that's kind of a défi for us in the coming years. As far as digital publications are concerned, again, it's a touchy question. I think Hamish really showed something that resonates with me too, as far as the sales that he's been talking about. We have seen a slight increase in sales concerning our digital catalog, but it's not that important. I'd say that it's still marginal as far as we're concerned. We're putting a lot of energy into it. We're trying to develop new platforms, new ways to disseminate our books. And of course, that digital offer is quite important. We've had partnerships developed with certain platforms in Europe, and we're really counting on them to, disseminate as much as possible. So I'd say that's pretty much sums up our position towards developing markets on the international scene. I'd let Lisa say more now. Lisa.
Okay. Thanks, Patrick. Lisa Quinn, Wilfrid Laurier University Press.
Thanks. I'm really glad to hear both of my colleagues making the point with regard to mission as being a kind of core driver behind a good chunk of our export programs, which sits right beside the need to generate revenue. When I think about my approach to particularly translation, it really is informed by both of those things in equal amounts. And I make, on a case-by-case decision, I evaluate potential offers or potential markets with a really keen eye towards balancing those two factors of making sure that Canadian scholarly content that's relevant to those international markets actually gets there in a way that is accessible and affordable, whether that is through the mechanism of pricing, whether that is through being flexible and with regard to terms of a deal that the market can bear or that the translating party can bear, given their resources, whether that's government support, et cetera. I think that keeping that view of the mission of a scholarly press, the mission of a Canadian university press to bring Canadian scholarship to the world starts to become a real key decision maker, as long as you're not, losing your shirt, essentially financially, trying to put those things in balance. I was looking at, in response to the numbers, Hamish, it's quite interesting to take a look at those figures, because I think that they really demonstrate, with the drop in college market, that many of us are sort of looking to increasingly diversify what our revenue streams are, and that export starts to become a really key component in that, even if the overall number is relatively small. When I look at my own numbers, for example, the US market, of course, for us is a central, it's easy to think about the North American market as one cohesive chunk, but of course it's not. For Canada, it is quite different in some very significant ways. We're constantly battling how much Canada do you pack into the title or not, in terms of a particular book, even when the methodology or the core themes of the research might in fact be very applicable to a wide range of applications, that that can be a turn off immediately in terms of relevance. So how do you best make that case for the relevance of nationally derived scholarship? But looking at our numbers there, easily 40 to 45% of our print sales are coming from the United States. And then we're looking at a further, maybe 12-ish% coming from the rest of the world. This is our English language print sales. And the bulk of those, of course, from the UK, but increasingly from Europe. When I look at those, I think about the challenge for a press that's operating in a small domestic market, such as Canada, with a relatively small population. As we're looking at increased demand for cost recovery, shrinking or long static operating subventions from various support programs, the financial pressures of copyright, which I'm sure are also playing into, the drop in sales within the college market. All of these things that mean that for most of us on the revenue side, putting the mission to one side and looking at the revenue, they're just, as Patrick said, there's no room for us to leave money on the table, that we need to make sure that we are fully engaging with every possible market that we can. Of course, the question of ROI then starts to come up. For a press of our size, we're relatively small. We're looking to build long-term relationships with key partners, key presses, that match up with our list, with our interests, with the type of scholarship that we're producing, the editorial direction of our list, that we feel is a good avenue of exchange, both in terms of the buy and the sell, and in where geographical rights are concerned. So, you know, we look for ourselves to increasingly to not just the UK, but to Australia, to New Zealand, to the English language Pacific Rim. South Africa is a really interesting market. For us, we've had a number of successes there. So I think that, you know, that's going to be an area of focus for us. So it's really this question of targeting, careful targeting with international partners who share our interests in genre and subject matter. The question asked about challenges, and I think here, the biggest challenge for us, I would say, honestly, is staff capacity and time to undertake that kind of work, which I'm sure is a common complaint. But I'd like to give a shout out here to funders here, because I think this is where they play a really key role, both in terms of building revenue, but in terms of that mission for exporting Canadian scholarship, for exporting Canadian culture. So I know that I would not be able to have the degree of activity in my rights and export programs that I do if it weren't for the support of Livre Canada Books. And further to in Ontario for my provincial support from Ontario Creates. Those export funds really are the difference between my ability to engage in relationship building, engage in book fairs, etc. So they start to become, for a market like Canada, really key players.
Oh, they're essential, that's for sure. Thank you, Lisa, for underlying that. Yeah.
So to come around to the next set of discussion, Patrick, you talked about digital being relatively marginal, but the emergence of platforms that you have to partner with. And where I wanted to go next was to talk about digital. For many years now, we've seen a movement with research libraries wanting to acquire university press products digitally. And now globally, there are all kinds of talk of open access mandates, market demands, especially in Europe, but certainly in Canada as well. There's a lot of talk about this. And I wanted to ask you all about how these movements affect your approach to foreign markets and rights sales, if that even means anything in that context, and your role in the dissemination of Canadian scholarship. And Patrick, I'll invite you to go first on this one.
Yeah. I mean, our digital catalog is, of course, the best way for us to disseminate our books. That's, I mean, the digital world, nobody can argue with this, has brought great things as far as dissemination of knowledge and of content across the world. So that's I mean, that's not even to question. But when we start contemplating that with open access issues, then yeah, things become more complicated. To put it simply, I mean, open access is the holy grail of dissemination. And everybody would want that to be the way to go. But the problem is, as holy grail pertains, is that trail is fraught with peril and many perils. And the bottom line is open access comes with a cost, basically put. And as far as things are concerned right now, I don't think there's a business model that exists that can allow us to safely put out books in OA in a sustainable fashion. I wish we did have the model. I think some options are on the table right now as far as ACUP is concerned. We're working on models that would allow us to go forward with that. But bottom line again is, you know, financially, there's a cost related to open access, and somebody has to assume those costs. And right now we have the feeling that the presses are being asked to assume that cost. For us, that's a major problem, because if it were up to me, I'd put all my catalog in open access. That would be the surest way for me to be sure that someone in Peking has access to Beijing, has access to our data or knowledge or books, across the world. And that's the general idea. Like I said before in our first topic, is our mission is dissemination. That's what we do. That's what we aim for. But open access is a difficult one. It's a difficult question, and we're going to need to really put a lot of energies in coming years to convince our governments to help us achieve this goal in such a way that we can ensure sustainability. So that's what I would, in a nutshell, have to say concerning OA. When we're talking about OA and international markets, well, I don't consider that to be, you can't talk about international markets and OA since it's free. There's no revenue tied to OA unless you have licensings with certain institutions. But generally, you're just accepting that there will no longer be any revenues tied with the digital sales of your books, and that can be a problem because, like I said before, even though our digital sales are rather marginal, they remain essential. They remain important. Without them, we would be in trouble. So it's a delicate equilibrium that we have to aim for, and OA is a menace, if I can say so, to that equilibrium. So that's the picture.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. Lisa, let's get your perspective on this. Is OA a menace?
Oh gosh, I was just thinking that's quite a note to follow up on. I'm going to agree completely with the point that there needs to be, if open access is a collective goal, there needs to be collective investment, and that has to be on the part of all of the stakeholders in the current system. So as it exists right now, I agree wholly with Patrick that the current level of discussion and what seems to be the case is that the presses are being asked, publishers are being asked to bear the weight of that, to figure that problem out. And to do so with an expectation of continued market success. And I think those things don't sit very well together. And I think that if we look internationally at what is working, what isn't working, we see those pressures very much in play. And I won't dive too much into that. I know there's there's a great session tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow. I'll check your calendar on a kind of overall OA assessment update within the university press scene. So that is certainly an ongoing topic of discussion. But I think recognizing that is a core reality of the discussion around open access is really important. Like Patrick, I wish I could just fling everything into an open access format. I would dearly love to be able to do that. I'm trained as a librarian. I want to provide access to everything that I'm producing. That said, I think the idea of access needs to be somewhat complicated. It's one thing to think about access of research for scholars, and I think that the OA perspective is very trained on that. But when we start talking about access to the general reader, that is where things get, I think, also tricky, because people come to long form scholarship, they come to books in very different ways. And a good chunk of that readership is still accessing content through the market. And so if you're looking at the challenge of distributing open access content, how do you put that content next to the book on the shelf, which is still a player in terms of discoverability? How do you understand the siloing of the kinds of metadata and distribution networks for open access material with, say, how public libraries are ingesting content, or how the literary market is coming to content? So I think that those are some really fundamental questions that need to be addressed before we sort of not so much throw open the gates, but before we commit to a model that can destroy our ability or seriously put in jeopardy our ability to reach those other markets. It is, to me, one of the great ironies of open access that I think it will simultaneously close doors at the same time that it will open them for certain readers. I'm not, and also authors, because there's with the model of book processing charges that has really become more de rigueur, or that if that's not even borne by the author, that it's borne by their institution, who they're affiliated with. So do you have a rich donor? Do you have a rich background? Do you have a wealthy research institute that can, push your content into that format, acknowledging that in fact there's a cost? I think that is going to shift fundamentally shift the nature of what gets published in some challenging ways. So for my own press, one of the, and it does beg the question of what the impact of that is on international exchange, whether it's through the market or not through the market, through scholarly networks. For myself, the way I've been approaching the fact that I can't afford, given my own mandate at my own institution, to fling open all of my content, we have been looking for ways to open use of our content in ways that are a little bit more distant, that can demonstrate that. So we've been really looking, we have a podcasting project. We've been looking at sort of alternative formats of scholarship that can be connected to the concept of the book, or research then in a different, is being explored in a different way. I'm really interested in looking at kind of linked open data projects, for example. So how can I make my data set, if you will, available to researchers in a way that doesn't jeopardize the reader market, the retail market for that content? So that allows scholars to work, with things like distant reading or other kinds of mechanisms. So I think there are some really interesting possibilities out there, even with the restrictions that we have necessarily placed on us to continue to generate revenue.
Really
interesting. Hamish Cameron, University of Toronto Press.
Well, to say briefly that it's a looming menace. Taken open access, taken to its extreme implementation, has huge impacts on mission and list building and priorities and the interests of who's providing the funding in making those decisions. It could completely change the paradigm that we operate a scholarly press on. But currently it thankfully it is not a huge factor. It's not a huge factor in selling rights, for one thing. But for us, I will say that digital sales are a significant source of revenue. They constitute about 17% of our overall revenue currently, so that's a lot. That's more than our print sales to Europe. So and of course it's our digital sales that will first be impacted by open access, cannibalizing of the list. So it's a very, very big concern, and the funding model has not in any way been determined at this point. So it's definitely a threat. I will say that the rights manager told me that open access is not really discussed, in the Frankfurt, venue much. But what is discussed a lot more now is that trading partners are looking to bundle digital rights and audio rights as well as print rights. That's a much more common, topic of conversation when you're selling rights now.
Hamish, I will add that for my press as well, the digital sales component is key. On average over the last 5 years, we've seen a rise in our digital sales from about 18% to sitting around average 22% of our overall sales revenue. So it is not insignificant.
Yeah, for sure.
If I may, you see that's another difference between Francophone and Anglophone markets. The digital market, as far as French language is concerned, is not what it is in the English language market. It's really surprising to me. One would expect that concerning digital access, I mean, everybody would have the same inclination to have access to it. But I'm listening to Hamish and Lisa's numbers, and ours are much lower than that. We're more around 10, 11, 12%. So that's another significant difference to consider. Yeah.
All right, let's shift the theme a little bit and talk about another issue that I think is near and dear to Frankfurt, and that has to do with languages and translation and such. Canada being a nation with 2 official languages, English and French, about 70 Indigenous languages, and a whole lot of linguistic diversity beyond that just in Canada's population. But at Frankfurt, rights are traded in dozens of different languages. And I know that this is an issue for Canadian university presses in terms of translations, both exporting and importing, and thinking about linguistic diversity as an increasing part of how they do business. So I'd like the panelists to tell us their perspectives on that. And this time, let's begin with Lisa.
Thanks, John. I think the diversity that makes us such a rich nation, that's reflected in this linguistic diversity, is also a significant challenge. And I think that has been a challenge Canada has been dealing with ad infinitum. It's a tough one, especially given our relatively small population. So that the question that I think of here is, how do we fairly and equitably share our cultures, our knowledges, our stories with one another and with the world? And that this really has been a long-standing policy issue in Canada. Translation here really is key, that people can come to information, can come to long-form scholarship in their own language, that in a way that they can fully engage with its richness, given that linguistic diversity. So translation is really key in terms of that sharing and promotion of knowledge and understanding. And the real challenge for Canadian university presses is that we simply do not have any kind of robust mechanism for supporting nonfiction translation in this country, despite that proven long-standing linguistic diversity. There are translation programs, but the primary one, which is administered by the Canada Council for the Arts, is focused very squarely on literary nonfiction. And they have used both in policy and in practice a very restrictive approach here. So, for example, if the work was funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in any way, it is considered ineligible right from the start. And then, you know, anything that is deemed too scholarly, which you can imagine is a moving target, is considered to be ineligible. This has been a huge problem, not only for works that ostensibly fit within their mandate, which is to say to promote the study of Canadian culture and the arts in Canada and abroad. But you know, when the Francophone Essay Forum is considered to be too scholarly, then you're running into issues with you know, enabling that to reach beyond the Francophone market in Canada and the Francophone market internationally. It's to me a great irony that I have an easier time translating work into Dutch than I do getting it into French, and that seems to me a major infrastructure gap that really needs to be addressed, both in terms of supporting sharing commerce between the domestic markets in Canada, the Anglophone and Francophone, but also our ability to trade internationally, particularly when we're talking about increasingly our ability to distribute rather than sell geographical rights. You know, the fact that we could double those markets up or trade with our Quebecois, our Francophone press partners to ensure a much broader distribution of that scholarship is a lost opportunity, I think, both in terms of revenue and in terms of fulfilling our mission. So I think, you know, where scholarship is concerned, we have only one other option for translation funding. It's half the amount that is the Canada Council standard grant. And that is through the Award to Scholarly Publications program, but they're limited to 5 grants per year. As I said, about roughly half of what is offered through a standard CCA translation grant. So, you know, this is having a really significant impact on right sales, export of finished goods to international markets. As Hamish noted, that the UTP rights manager raised the flag on that immediately in that discussion, because like UTP for my press, that was a small but regular and significant piece of revenue and business that we used to do that we no longer are able to engage in. I used to be able to sell either, you know, 1 to 2 titles, buy 1 to 2 titles back and forth between the Quebec University presses. We had good ongoing exchange, but we no longer have the support to continue engaging in that kind of activity. And so I'm going to stop there, as I actually feel quite passionate about this particular subject. It's I think it is a real infrastructure gap.
Okay, let's go to Hamish. Linguistic diversity translation, what are the challenges, opportunities as you see?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what Lisa has already said, and I know that Patrick has something interesting to say about this, but I will say that in addition to the, you know, one of the principal funding source disappearing for translations, the remaining one, the Aid to Scholarly Publishing Program, does not fund textbook translations. So that's, you know, so there's even less funding available for something which is a very important link which is supposed to be a priority within the country, you know, as a cultural objective, is virtually impossible to, you know, attain. Yeah, it's going in the opposite direction of what we should be going. But Patrick, carry on.
No, I think Lisa said it all. As far as translation is concerned in Canada, there's a contradiction. I mean, like I usually say, we're living in a country where there's been some kind of nation building around the fact that we have 2 official languages, and it's preposterous to me to know that what is being published in scholarly publishings in English Canada is not being funneled in French Canada and vice versa. So basically, we're like living in two silos. We're doing research, doing our things on each side, and there's no communication, there's no sharing, there's no. It's nonsense to know that this research, this knowledge, is not being translated one way or another. I find Lisa's comments on the fact that it's easier for her to translate towards Dutch than it is towards French. There's something amiss here. It's just preposterous, like I said, for a country like Canada that se targue of being a country of knowledge and an économie du savoir, and to know that we're not doing this, we're not partaking into the exchange of knowledge in our two nations. So I don't know. It's a very, very difficult situation right now. I know we've stopped. We've tried again this year to translate two books that I found really interesting, really important for our French readers to be able to have access to, and we hit a wall twice. So there's a sentiment de découragement. We're being discouraged to even try to get these books to be translated. And so, I mean, to even consider then afterwards the whole impact of that on international markets is, I mean, we have a problem at home. So imagine what it is when we're talking about considering international markets. It's nonsense. And it's really sad, actually.
The Canada Council for the Arts Literary Translation Program, I mean, how long has that been in place? That's decades and decades old. We might consider that it's time to rethink, the nation building, the cultural and the communications kind of priorities around what makes that kind of thing go, because we don't live in the same world in which those policies were designed for anymore. That is. It's kind of a staggering situation. I mean, given the state of the world, the state of how we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and things like that, and to have no arm of the sort of federal infrastructure that actually takes that seriously is quite interesting.
Historically,
we have a little bit of time left for Q&A, and there's one question that's shown up in the Q&A section of Zoom here, and I would invite anybody else that if you do have questions to type them in there. But Taylor McGrath, hi Taylor, asks about the EU planning to begin enforcing accessibility requirements in ebooks, selling in Europe beginning in 2025, and do the speakers foresee these requirements affecting their press, which is, I think, interesting, because I know in Canada we have had a push towards ebook accessibility in the past year. Who wants to take the lead on this? Hamish, you just coughed, so you appeared on screen. Yeah.
I don't know what the specifics of the EU requirements are, but I'm sure we'll have no problem meeting them. I mean, as you said, we're in the process of formatting our ebooks so that they meet Canadian accessibility requirements, and it's a part of every either whether it's an ebook or website rollout, that there's a accessibility component. Most vendors don't even. Most vendors have something in place to respond to requests for proposals on accessibility. So if they can do it in Europe, then I think we can do it as well.
Fair enough. Anybody else have any? I can't remember the name of the program that Heritage came out with this year, but there is a specific push to be able to put that into practice in Canada.
There's a big movement in Canada towards accessibility. There's a number of support programs, both at the provincial and federal level, that are moving towards improving accessibility of content. In Ontario, we're looking at legislation similar to the EU that is coming down that will certainly driving our conversion to EPUB 3, which enables that kind of accessibility. We have been a participant. The Canada Book Fund has put some money towards supporting production of accessible audiobooks, which has been a great program to enable many of us to make, first of all, to get our content into audiobook format, but to ensure that right from the outset, right from initial production, so not addressing questions of conversion, that we are developing workflows that bring content directly into accessible formats. And so I think that that those pressures in terms of legislation are shared among a number of jurisdictions, and that we're steadily working in that direction. I know our web partner Hamish as well, our web platform that we use, that has been conversion services and ensuring that we've got appropriate tagging in terms of alternate text for images, et cetera, is all steadily underway right now.
Yeah.
Okay. There's not another Q&A. I wanted to come back around to something that Patrick mentioned with respect to digital distribution, that you were dealing with European distribution partners, European platforms, and then Lisa talked about the sort of the book processing charge that would, supposedly, what's the buzzword, subvent or underwrite the costs of an open access book, and asking who's the donor that's going to be behind that. And I wondered if, I know this is a big topic of discussion on the journal side of open access publishing, is around the organization of collectives and collective action within, say, the library market to create a central funding body for that. Are you, as publishers, aware or participating in any discussions along those lines? I didn't get the impression when you were talking, but is there collective action around figuring out where the funding comes from on a sort of a larger organizational basis, as opposed to just the market on its own?
That's a really interesting question, John, and I think it's a very challenging one. Are we talking about it? Yes. Have we figured out what to do about it? No. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and one of the major ones to my mind, and I'm gonna trip into a trope of Canadian politics and say the split between provincial and federal jurisdictions starts to become sticky. If you consider that education is the jurisdiction of the province and that our institution's core funding is coming from a provincial source, that includes any operational support for a press, direction of mandate for that press, that there's a heavy pressure there. Funding for academic research comes from not only from that level of institutional support, but the research councils, the tri-councils, which of course are all federally funded and federally determined. So one of the challenges to my mind, and you see this right now with the pressures that are happening in Ontario and Alberta, certainly pre-COVID, and that's a whole other variable that I don't even quite know how to factor in. Although I do remain convinced that it is going to usher in more lasting change. It's not going to be a transitory thing. Some of the outcomes there, but I think that starts to become a challenge to that particular model. So what who do you talk to? I mean, on a very basic level, would such a thing be best organized among every provost of every university in the country kicking into a central fund that is then somehow distributed among university presses or eligible publishing programs, however they might be determined? Do you target only the universities, the 16 universities in this country that are doing the great service to the rest of the scholarly community of supporting a press? Do they need to get together and sort of advocate on their behalf and all of our collective behalfs? Is this a place where the Tri-Council, for example, should be stepping in to say we need to address scholarly communications infrastructure in relationship to scholarly publishing in this country more effectively? I don't know. You know, and then to layer on top of that, what kind of impact is that going to have on our ability as hybrid organizations who are both publisher and scholarly organization to fully engage in market activity that has traditionally been the backbone of our financial stability? So I think it is in fact an excellent question to say, how do we approach that that question that Patrick is asking, which is who's going to pay?
There's another question here specifically for Patrick from Melissa Pitts from UBC Press, interested in your focus on North Africa for rights sales and exchanges. And can you talk about how you initiated publishing relationships in that geographic area? You talked about the Casablanca Book Fair.
Well, it's thanks to LCB in part, and to DNL in Quebec, and especially thanks to Ginette Péloquin, who had the mandate of putting this together, and she did a great job. So yeah, she basically took my hand and led me through the Casablanca Book Fair. Thanks to her, I got to meet, like I said, the proprietors and animators of the Librairie Préface and CDPL, which is the Center of Distribution of Books in Casablanca. And that partnership was born, and it's a great partnership. I mean, there's so much interest in North Africa, especially in those francophone countries. There's great interest for what we're doing here in Canada. You have to keep in mind that specific region of the world. I won't go into the politics of it all and the history of it all, but I mean, there is a colonial aspect to it, with France basically being omnipresent in those markets. And I believe that to them, it's quite refreshing to know that there is, you know, life outside of France. And, you know, there are players outside of France, and we intend to be some of those players over there. And the contacts are great, but you really need to have that one-on-one discussion with these partners, and to develop a relationship based on confidence and trust and so on. But it's a great region of the world to explore and to develop. I don't know if I answered your question, Melissa, but there you go.
Thanks. That's a super interesting question, I think, and an interesting answer. That takes us to just about 8 o'clock. So we should probably, or 8 o'clock my time. What is it, 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Frankfurt? This Zoom stuff is interesting, eh? Anyway, I think we'll take this opportunity to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Patrick Poirier, Hamish Cameron, Lisa Quinn, for your work on this panel. Thanks to Maya Desjardins for behind the scenes, keeping everything running perfectly. And thanks to all the attendees that have dropped in somehow magically to listen to this. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John, for moderating us. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.